97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
I think our track record in the last 20 years, how many NFC East titles, playoff appearances, and appearances in the NFC Championship game, those are some of the metrics I look at, and I'll compare our record with almost anybody.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Josh Henning alongside Ryan Rothstein live here at the Gallery Bar booking games at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. Filling in for Mike Gill here. And of course, it's a Monday, which means it's a Mosher Monday. Geoff Mosher joins us here. Actually, I'm still waiting for Ryan to return from wherever he went, but I got Geoff Mosher at least here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, good to have you back. How was your extended weekend?
Well, it's extended into the week, so it was a work weekend as we do at this time of the year. It doesn't even feel like there was a weekend, to be honest with you.
So let's start with the CJ Gardner Johnson stuff, because obviously he's tweeting again, and he thinks he's been wronged, basically, for whatever reason. I'm not fully sure why he thinks that, but give the audience a breakdown from how we got from CJ Gardner Johnson being offered a multi-year deal by the Eagles to getting a one-year deal from the Lions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. This seems this is like an onion with a lot of layers.
A lot of layers.
Yeah. So the multi-year deal, as I understand it, was still structured like a deal that could be you could get out of after 1 year if what I understand is accurate. So I think that's sort of what the agent was insinuating when he tweeted last night, saying that, it looks good, like a 3-year, $24 million deal, but all of it's backloaded. And I imagine that he said something about $17 million that probably wasn't guaranteed. So obviously CJ Gardner Johnson went into the whole free agent process expecting to make a certain amount of money. And it was not there for him, not only with the Eagles, but anybody else, right? Jesse Bates got $16 million. The tag was $14 million. If you look at every other safety, from Von Bell to Donovan Wilson to Jordan Poyer to Marcus Epps to whoever, they're all in that $6 to $8 million range. There was not like a middle class, right, of safeties this year. I think you'd have to ask CJ, and I know he spoke to the Lions media today. Maybe he was expecting something at first huge and then something in between. Whatever the factors were, it wasn't there for him. And as I always say, the longer you stay in free agency, it's usually the money doesn't get better. It usually gets worse. So I was actually starting to think, I think I said this to Mike last week or you or somebody, that the longer he's on the market, it feels more toward like he'd have to sign a 1-year deal and try again next year. Now, why would the Eagles not offer him the same money that he got from the Lions? It's a question I'm still trying to work on myself, just in asking around, because he was such a good player for them last year, Josh, that it's hard not to think they couldn't make the money work, even though they did bring back. I don't think they believed going into free agency that they were going to bring back Bradbury. I think the number wound up being pretty favorable with him. He didn't get like $21 million to $22 million like some of the top corners make. So they had a good chance to bring him back. So maybe they were not expecting that, and then that changed their financial situation. But we all know you can make a 1-year, $6.5 to $8 million deal work. When they signed Joe Flacco a couple of years ago, they gave him a 1-year deal for $3 or $4 million and spread it out over like 4 dummy years. Like, they could have made it work if they wanted to, I'm sure.
I know Adam talked about last week. I talked to him on Tuesday last week, Geoff, that a lot of these guys went into free agency. Your Marcus Epps, down to CJ Gardner Johnson. A lot of these guys went in there expecting a certain amount of money, and they didn't get that money. And I mean, I actually read somewhere, I think it was The Athletic, said that a team laughed at Marcus Epps, for what he was asking for versus what he got. So how much of what CJ Gardner Johnson happened with him was, I mean, he says on Twitter he's being blackballed, which we know is ridiculous. So, you know, how much of these guys maybe, I mean, are they just getting bad advice going in the free agency, thinking they're going to get big money, or is this just another example of how we understanding the market?
I think it's a combination of a few things. First, there's always, you know, every individual is different. You make a great point because Adam brought this up about a week ago on our podcast. He had a good nugget, and he said Marcus Epps was looking to get paid, and he did not make anything extravagant. I think we've seen in the past, right? Just go back to last year. Christian Kirk made an obscene amount of money for the type of player that he was, right? And so I think that a lot of players do go into free agency thinking that it doesn't matter if they're considered the top three at their position. They're going to make a crap load of money. But I do think that the Christian Kirks are becoming more few and far between. I think teams are doing a lot better job either using the franchise tag or getting extensions done early, for like the Eagles do for their best players. And you're just not seeing the caliber of star athlete move in free agency over the last few years, for a while now, that you used to see all the time. And I just think that there's too many team-friendly mechanisms, whether it's a fifth-year option, a franchise tag, a transition tag, an extension. You know, there's just too many good teams now that are doing it the right way, knowing the cap is going up and figuring, whether it's dummy years like the Eagles do, figuring out a way. Because if you go look at the last year or two or three, like Von Miller definitely last year was a big guy who to move in free agency, but he was on his third contract at that point. Like, you know, it's very rare that you get like this stud player. Bates is a good example this year. He's really the only one of a guy looking for a second contract who has made multiple Pro Bowls who just didn't get re-upped for his own team. Even Javon Hargrave, stud player, but third contract because he's a little bit older. You just don't see the A-list guys moving in free agency as much as you used to.
Moshe, what's the priority going to be? I know we still have some time before we get to draft day, draft coverage. I mean, draft coverage has already started, but you get what I'm saying. What's the priority there, and how has free agency so far impacted potentially the approach come draft time?
Yeah, I mean, you like to think that their approach doesn't change because of free agency, but the reality is that sometimes it does, and where it would have been easier to say number 10 is a cornerback, lock, stock, and barrel, because you're either losing Slay or losing Bradbury or this or that. Now, amazingly, these guys are back on multi-year deals. And by the way, you know, we haven't even talked about the Slay thing. I can't even begin to comprehend how a player that you allowed to seek a trade and then were going to release, then you do an about face and turn around him and sign him to more money. One, I've been covering this team for almost 20 years, and I've never seen anything like that.
Well, it falls back for me, Geoff. Things you and I talked about this on Wednesday on Football at 4. You know, we talked about the fact that we were like, how does this team not get a deal done with this guy and just say, you know what, why don't you go find a deal? Like, the whole thing was the most ridiculous thing. I mean, Geoff, I had people texting the show on Tuesday and Wednesday last week, losing their minds about how can Slay leave us? How can Slay say he wants to be in Philadelphia and then actually leave? Well, now that he's back, and it's like everyone's like, but we didn't get CJ. And it's just like, but you got Slay back. It's just so insane.
The one area that I really took delight in is watching, because this is such a natural reaction, right? It's human nature. It happens everywhere. But as soon as it looked like Slay was going to be on his way out, all of the reaction of, he wasn't that good. Where was he in the Super Bowl? He's not that good. And then now that he's back, it's like, oh, yeah, we got Darius Slay still. You know, it's like, oh, we should be good next year. We got Slay and Bradbury. Same thing with Bradbury. Yeah, you can beat him down the sideline. So, but then all of a sudden they're Eagles again. Everybody loves them. So, it certainly was a bizarre saga for all three of them, for Bradbury, for Slay, and then C.J. Gardner Johnson. But I think the big picture look at that, Josh, is that this team is quite different up the middle. You know, from losing Javon Hargrave to losing your two starting linebackers, Kaiser White and T.J. Edwards, to losing your starting safeties in Marcus Epps and C.J. Gardner. I mean, it's and also I think they're good at corner. I'm not as down as some people were, but they're not any younger or more dynamic at that position either. They're just older and locked into a couple more years of each. So it's up to them. That's why I say, you asked me about the draft approach, Ryan. Like, I don't think that they should be turning their nose up at a young corner just because that guy might not get on the field immediately if he's good. They draft offensive linemen who aren't supposed to get on the field immediately. So why wouldn't you do the same at corner? I mean, we don't need to. We could just do a whole separate football on 4 on how long it's been since they actually drafted and developed a good cornerback. It's been quite a while, and then forget about it with safety, right? So these are areas that they really need to get straight on in the draft.
Unpopular question and opinion, something I brought up to Josh earlier in the show. Is there a part of you, even if it's like 2% of you, is there a part of you that sort of scratches your head at the reality of bringing back an aging, not aging, I'm being dramatic, but an older secondary in both Slay and Bradbury, and you didn't decide to get younger there, to your points that you've made?
Yeah, see, I can only sort of answer that in a vacuum. I'd be sort of, I'd be willing to say that if after this draft they don't do something. I mean, signing Greedy Williams was that's something that, so Adam and I went into last year saying, it's great that you have Slay and Bradbury, but these guys could get hurt, and you really don't have a number 3 outside corner. Your number 3 corner is Zach McPherson, who enters year 2, and we never even saw him play year 1. And even here, a year later, he didn't play outside corner at all in year 2. And it doesn't seem like, with all those injuries they had with Avonte Maddox and CJ, they never got McPherson on the field. So their body language suggests that they're not really comfortable with this kid being a player for them. So they did at least get Greedy Williams, which is a little bit more of an attempt than last year to have somebody who can play outside corner if your 2 starters get hurt. Now, Greedy's got a ways to go. He was supposed to be a stud coming out of LSU. He couldn't make the Browns. He had trouble staying healthy. Doesn't mean he can't play. It's just he's got a little bit of ways to go. But at least that's a step in the right direction, Ryan, to your point. And if they use like a second-round pick or one of the first-round picks on a corner, then I'll say you're doing the right thing. You brought back 2 guys who can play because, yes, they're older and not as dynamic, but, my God, like they're way better than any cornerback tandem the Eagles have had since Lito and Sheldon, and now we're going like 2 decades here. So I have no issue with that, but I do think that they've got to replenish and get those replacements in and not wait until those guys are falling off the face of the earth.
Talking with Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter on Monday's edition of the Sports Bash. Josh Henning along with Ryan Rossi, filling in for Mike Gill, live from the Gallery Bar Booking Games at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. So, Jeff, with all that being said, how do you think all these moves impact the draft? Because a lot of people were texting in to me last week, Christian Gonzalez or Joey Porter Jr. or Witherspoon at 10th overall. Well, now it seems like those guys are pretty much out of the conversation probably. I mean, most likely. I mean, the Eagles typically go for best player available, right? But, how do you think this changes some of what they do in the draft? Do you think it's more or less likely they stay at 10 now? Do you think that, if I had $1 for every person who asked me, are they going to get Jalen Carter, I'd be rich by now.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it really changes it that much, Josh. I think there's three positions that stand out at that if they stay at 10. Obviously defensive line, if one of those major defensive tackles or ends falls to them, whether it's Carter or Anderson, I mean, that's unlikely to happen. I think the kid from Iowa will intrigue them, Van Ness. They clearly need a defensive tech, like a 5 tech, right, or a 3 tech for their pass rush, because once Jordan Davis, he needs 2 guys around him. Right now he only has Fletcher Cox and Milton Williams. I don't think they see Williams as a starter yet. And if they're in their traditional 4-3 nickel, then it's Fletcher Cox and Milton Williams. But I still think you need more than that. So, Van Ness could be a kid perhaps for them. And then I still think corner is on the table. I think if you're picking a 10 and you've got no offers to move down and, Witherspoon or Joey Porter Jr. is there, then you take them for everything that Ryan and I were talking about, is that, you've gotten lucky having no injuries at outside corner, but if you do, you want somebody there. And then plus you just want somebody to be able to step up and be able to even steal a job from one of these 2 guys by next year, if that's the way it is. Because the way these contracts are structured, the Eagles will be able to get out in a year or 2 with either of them anyway. So I don't think that they'll balk at the idea of taking a corner. And then, of course, offensive line. If there's an offensive lineman that they love, they've lost a lot of depth with Sayamalo and with Andre Dillard leaving. Now they've got Cam Jurgens, who's going to play right guard most likely this year. But as soon as he moves to center, which could be in 2024, right, if Kelsey finally says I'm done, then you need a right guard. And the Eagles have never been afraid of drafting on offensive linemen 1 year earlier. In fact, they've done it each of the last 2 years with Jurgens and Dickerson. Just so happens that Dickerson had to play as a rookie, but at the time they had Brandon Brooks, and they had Sayamalo at left guard. So they're very willing to draft a year early on these guys.
Mosh, let's go to the offense here for a second. And looking at the backfield, your thoughts and insight on Penny and what else is still yet to be done as far as adding depth and talent for the running back position. And you can also add your quick thoughts on the Eagles bringing in Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, I think the Penny signing it's sort of like this becoming this now vintage typical Eagle signing, which is like a low risk, high upside type of signing. It's a 1 year deal. It doesn't promise him anything. It doesn't stop them from adding another running back in the draft, free agency, trade, whatever, comes along. But it's a guy who, if they can keep him healthy and behind their offensive line, definitely has some tremendous abilities. The only problem is keeping him healthy. And that's why they also have Boston Scott. And that's why Kenneth Gainwell, most likely going into year 3 here, is going to see the biggest increase in snaps and playing time and usage. And don't forget about Trey Sermon, who is a guy that we've been told the coaches really, really like how hard he practiced, his abilities. They think he can play. And so he'll get a good look this training camp too. And if he's better and Rashad Penny is either injured or the injuries have made him less of a running back than he was in the past, then he's cuttable, and it's not a big deal. As for Mariota, I get why they did it. They needed a backup quarterback. They lost Minshew. As we understand, they wanted to try to get Minshew back. But obviously he went to the Colts because, the opportunity for him probably to try to play there is a little better. I happened to watch a couple of Falcons games last year just because I was watching tape on them, and then, of course, they were on some bad Amazon Thursday night games, and and he was one of the reasons those games were bad. I mean, he really was not good last year, and I don't think it was one of those things where you say, well, it was no weaponry or a bad offensive line or your head coach doesn't know what he's doing. I just saw throws that he missed that were guys were wide open, and he was just not even in their stratosphere. So I definitely have concerns that he's a guy that can step in and play and throw, win you games if Jalen Hurts was going to get hurt. Minshew did that 2 years ago against the Jets. Last year, he didn't play well against the Saints. He played better against the Cowboys. They lost a high-scoring game. But you sort of felt like, okay, even with Gardner Minshew, they're going to be all right, other than that New Orleans game, which was just a dud. But, until I see it, I'd be kind of skeptical that Marcus Mariota can go over there and sort of not miss a beat with the Eagles' offense.
With that being said, was there a better option out there then? Like, I had people have been asking me about Nick Foles and Matt Ryan for days before Mariota was signed. I don't know if those guys are better options. So was there a better option out there than Mariota for backup with Minshew gone?
Well, there were a lot of backup. This was like the year. If you needed a backup quarterback, there were tons of them, whether it was, Kyle Allen or Nick Mullins or, Sam Darnold wound up signing a 1 year deal. Cooper Rush signed back with the Cowboys, and some of these guys are in the $4 to $6 million range. Case Keenum, Mike White. Mike White made 8, so maybe that was a little bit too much. 8. Brissett made 8, but, there's still guys out there. Matt Ryan's out there. Teddy Bridgewater's out there. Joe Flacco actually played well last year when he was asked to go in for the Jets. He's out there. So Brandon Allen's out there. Like, I don't know if any of these guys are that much better or worse than Mariota based on Marcus Mariota's tape last year. So if he comes in here and he's healthier and he's different and this offense capitalizes on his strengths, then that's a different story. But, those names I just told you who are still available, I'm not so sure that they weren't better or aren't better than Mariota.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Nick Mullins play last year in the preseason?
For the Eagles?
Yeah.
He might have, now that I think about it. He might have.
I feel like he did. Like, I got to look it up now. It's good.
Was he among the last cuts? I don't even remember anymore.
I think he played in that, final preseason game.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And then they wound up claiming Ian Book off waivers after.
From the Saints,
like,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
So, yeah.
Yeah, he was on the Eagles preseason roster last year. Yeah.
Right.
The things I remember versus what I don't remember, it's the reason why I'm sitting here today.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's a good sickness, Josh. It's a good one.
It is.
It's also probably why I'm single. He's Geoff Mosher at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter. Check out the latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast, which dropped this morning. And, of course, Adam Kaplan will be back in tomorrow for Football at 4. And, of course, don't forget, InsideTheBirds.com. Jeff, appreciate you jumping on. And hopefully no more Eagle players go tweeting the rest of the day.
Oh, I can't guarantee that, but, we'll see what happens, Josh. Thanks for having me. Talk to you, Ryan. See you guys.
All right, later, man.
At Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter. Don't